The call came through just after 3 a.m., jarring me awake in the cold, dim quiet of our bedroom. The caller's voice was strained but clinical. "Mr. Carter, we're calling regarding your wife, Janine." My heart pounded at the mention of her name. Janine worked as a lawyer in the city, so the hours, the last-minute calls, weren't out of the ordinary. But something in the voice on the other end sounded off, like they were struggling to find the words. "Your wife was brought in from an incident," the voice continued, deliberately vague, "and she's currently in critical condition. You'll want to come down to St. John's Medical Center as soon as possible." "An incident? What happened?" I demanded. A pause and uncomfortable. "It would be best if you came in. We can discuss it in person." I threw on jeans, a hoodie, and rushed out the door, still groggy and full of worry, imagining car accidents or maybe even a robbery gone wrong. When I arrived at the hospital, I was escorted to a small room, the walls a flat, dull blue under fluorescent lights. A doctor entered, face carefully neutral. "Mr. Carter, I don't know how to tell you this, but your wife was found unconscious at another man's house." He waited a moment, likely gauging my reaction before continuing. "According to the man she was with, it appears they were engaging in intimate activities that got out of hand." I stared at him, my brain unable to process this. It felt like I'd been dropped into someone else's nightmare. "Are you sure it was my wife? Janine Carter?" "Yes, Mr. Carter. She's been unconscious since we brought her in. We'll need to keep her in an induced coma until we can safely assess her brain function." My hands trembled, a rage simmering beneath my shock. But then came the worst part. The doctor looked down at his clipboard, clearly unsettled. "It seems—" He cleared his throat. "There was an object found inside her, one that caused severe internal trauma." "What object?" The words felt like sandpaper in my throat. "Mr. Carter," he hesitated, looking away. "It was a kitchen whisk. Metal." The blood drained from my face as he explained how the whisk had caused severe bleeding, lodging deep, damaging her. He called it an experiment gone wrong, some deviant, reckless thrill that turned disastrous. When they allowed me to see her, Janine looked pale, tubes running out of her, eyes closed. The woman I'd married, the woman I thought I knew, now lay silent, wounded by her own recklessness and another man's twisted game. I felt pity, but anger outweighed it, eclipsing any trace of love or sorrow I might have felt. By morning, the shock had faded, replaced by an ice-cold determination. I spoke with her doctors and informed them that I would not be financially responsible for her care beyond this point. My next call was to the bank, and I cut off every joint account, revoked her access to every financial safety net I'd given her over the years. She'd betrayed me, humiliated me, and I wanted her to feel the consequences of her choices as brutally as I felt them now. As I left the hospital, I didn't look back. The following weeks passed in a haze of paperwork, phone calls, and the surreal, grinding pain of betrayal. I went through the motions like a man on autopilot, going to work, meeting with attorneys, preparing for the inevitable divorce proceedings. Every time Janine's name popped up on an email or a document, it was like a fresh stab. But the worst of it came in the form of letters from the hospital, updates on her condition, reminders of unpaid bills, and notices about the mounting debt she'd incurred. I kept every one of them, unopened, tossed in a drawer. I didn't know what state she was in or if her so-called lover had bothered to visit her. The thought of him, a nameless, faceless figure, gnawed at me, though I could picture him only in the vaguest terms. A man arrogant enough to entertain these dangerous fantasies with someone else's wife. A man careless enough to turn it into a nightmare. My first real encounter with him happened at an entirely unexpected place, the local coffee shop a few blocks from my office. I'd gone there to clear my head, hoping a change of scenery might wash away the constant bitter memories. I hadn't even realized he was there until I heard the barista call out his name. "Adrian, large latte?" I turned, and there he was, fit, handsome in a rough-edged way, with a hint of that look, that self-assured smirk I'd seen on the faces of men who believed the world belonged to them. I walked over, a primal part of me bristling. Adrian, isn't it? He looked up, startled, then something flickered in his eyes. A recognition, an uncomfortable realization. Yep, and you are? I'm Janine's husband. The smirk faltered, just barely, but he quickly covered it up with a calm shrug, as though meeting the husband of the woman he'd put in the hospital was just another part of his day. Ah, I see. Small world. Small enough that I couldn't go far without hearing about you, I replied, voice tight, fists clenched. I took a long breath, tamping down the rage coiling in my stomach. I'm curious, Adrian. What exactly were you two thinking? He leaned back, eyes steady but cold. Look, I didn't force her into anything she didn't want. It was all her idea. She was adventurous. A new wave of fury washed over me. Adventurous? You nearly killed her. A dark smile played on his lips. She loved it, he said, his voice low. More than she ever let on to you, I'd bet. I clenched my jaw, holding myself back from lunging at him. He seemed to relish my anger, feeding off it, enjoying the hurt in my eyes. It struck me then how little he cared, how completely, shamelessly indifferent he was to the damage he'd caused. And now? She's in a hospital bed with no income, no husband to look after her, I said. Because of you, Adrian shrugged. That's between you and her. As far as I'm concerned, Janine was just another thrill, one of many. He took his latte and left without another glance, leaving me to stand there, hollowed out, the hurt bleeding into something darker. That night, I went home and unlocked the drawer where I'd stashed her hospital bills. Staring at the growing mountain of debt, I felt a twisted sort of satisfaction. This was the life she'd chosen. This was the man she'd risked everything for. I left her there in the hospital, unreachable, unable to contact me as the walls began closing in on her. I'd loved her once, given her everything she could have wanted, but she'd shown me just how cheap that was to her, how easily she'd discarded it for the fleeting thrill of some reckless affair. A week after I encountered Adrian, I received a letter from a private attorney. I opened it, expecting another piece of hospital bureaucracy, but this was different. Janine, it seemed, had awakened, and she'd retained counsel. In cold, precise legal jargon, the letter outlined her intent to pursue half of our joint assets. It made my blood boil. The same woman who'd humiliated me and risked her life for some twisted liaison now wanted to pick apart the life we'd built together, the life I'd built for us. But there was more. She was seeking restitution for emotional damages due to my supposed abandonment. An hour later, I found myself standing outside Adrian's apartment. My hands trembled with barely contained fury as I hammered on the door. I heard footsteps, lazy, unhurried, and then there he was, leaning against the doorframe, shirtless, the faint remnants of a cocky smirk on his face. Well, well, he drawled, crossing his arms. Can't get enough of me, huh? I didn't waste a second. I slammed my fist into his jaw, sending him stumbling back. His smirk disappeared, replaced by a look of shock and rage as he wiped a trickle of blood from his lip. Ah, so you want to do this the hard way, huh? He lunged at me, fists swinging wildly. I sidestepped, grabbing his arm and twisting it behind his back, slamming him against the wall with a force that shook the whole apartment. You think you can just waltz in and ruin lives, my life, without consequence? I growled, tightening my hold until he let out a pained gasp. He struggled, then managed to twist out of my grip, pushing me back. Your wife came to me, pal. She couldn't stand being with some pathetic, boring husband, so she came looking for a real thrill. That was it. I charged forward, fists flying, each punch landing with the weight of all the months of betrayal and anger that had been building inside me. I barely felt his blows as I took him down, slamming him against the cold tile floor, my knuckles raw and bleeding, yet somehow numb. You ruined her, I shouted, feeling the words tear out of me. And now you think you can just sit here in your little bubble untouched? Adrian spit blood, laughing through bruised, swollen lips. You can hit me all you want, but I'm not the one who has to live with her, he sneered, even as he struggled to catch his breath. I got what I wanted. Can you say the same? I froze, the truth of it hitting me. He didn't care. There was nothing I could do to him that would match the damage Janine's betrayal had done to me. Hitting him was satisfying, sure, But it wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't erase the images, wouldn't bring back the trust she'd shattered. I left him there, lying on his apartment floor, gasping and cursing. When I got back to my car, a dark, ruthless idea took root, one that sank into me with a clarity that felt like a new purpose. If Janine wanted to take me for everything, she would need to find me first. I spent the next 2 days preparing, shifting assets, moving bank accounts, and notifying my attorney that I'd be leaving the country. By the end of the week, my money, my investments, even the house, everything was transferred into a network of new accounts that Janine couldn't touch. And I kept just enough under my own name for my lawyer to work with, letting him know to string out the divorce proceedings as long as possible. A day later, I was on a flight to Greece, phone turned off, a small bag in hand, and the hollow, dark satisfaction that came with knowing I'd left her exactly where she belonged, alone, broke, and far from the life she'd tried to ruin. She could have the memories of her little adventure. All I took was my freedom. In Greece, days drifted by in a haze of sun and salt air. I rented a small villa by the coast, far from the bustling tourist traps. It was quiet, serene, almost medicinal. And for a while, I managed to push Janine and Adrian out of my mind, immersing myself in the slow rhythms of the Mediterranean life. I spent my days on secluded beaches, sipping black coffee at dawn, letting the weight of everything fade into the endless stretch of blue horizon. Then, one morning, I received an encrypted message on the app my attorney had set up for me. As much as I'd tried to leave everything behind, there was still the unfinished business of the divorce proceedings, and the occasional necessary updates to ensure Janine remained financially isolated. Update: Janine sold her jewelry and car to settle some debts, but is falling behind. She's looking to take legal action to find your whereabouts. She's even hired a private investigator. I couldn't help the faint smirk that crossed my lips. So she was scrambling. Good. Days turned into weeks, then nearly 2 months. By now, Janine's lawyer had tried every trick in the book, and each time, my legal team blocked them, delayed them, leaving her tangled in red tape and mounting debts. I kept a close eye on the updates, though I told myself it was only to ensure my protection. Then, one night, I saw a familiar face, a shock of dark hair, a cocky half-smirk, on a bustling street in Mykonos. Adrian, he was with 2 other men, both dressed in flashy clothes, swaggering as if they owned the island. I froze, every nerve sparking, but I managed to pull myself back into the shadows, watching, waiting, calculating. The odds of him being here by coincidence seemed slim, but I doubted he even knew who he was up against. I followed them to a nearby club, a dark, pulsating venue tucked into the heart of the town. I kept my distance, slipping in behind him, blending into the crowd as they ordered drinks. Adrian, cocky and carelessly loud, held court at the bar, throwing back shots with his new friends, oblivious to anything beyond his immediate pleasure. He laughed too loudly, gestured too wildly, and when he sauntered over to the VIP section, I followed, unnoticed in the crush of bodies. I watched him, a dark satisfaction curling in my chest as I saw him for what he was, reckless, careless, flaunting every red cent he could find, likely paid by other desperate women looking for a thrill. He was laughing now, racking up a bill, surrounded by strangers who didn't care about him, wouldn't remember him in the morning. It was the empty life he deserved, a hollow reflection of what he'd taken from me. Finally, when he staggered away from the bar alone, I slipped from the shadows. "Adrian," I called, my voice low, ice cold. He turned, eyes narrowed, then recognition flickered across his face, quickly followed by irritation. "What the hell are you doing here?" he slurred, slumping against the wall. "Seems you're following in my footsteps," I said, letting the venom slip into my voice. "Trying to escape your mess?" He chuckled, a low, condescending laugh that sent a ripple of anger through me. "Escape? I don't need to escape anything. Your wife came to me. I didn't come looking for her. She's ruined now," I said quietly, stepping closer. "Her life is in tatters. She's alone, desperate, humiliated. Everything she thought she'd get from me, you took from her." His expression faltered for the first time. a flicker of something almost vulnerable before he quickly covered it with another sneer. Maybe she deserved it. I stepped closer, barely containing the rage coiled inside. And you, what do you deserve, Adrian? He didn't answer, didn't have to. I grabbed him by the collar, shoving him back against the wall with a force that knocked the air from his lungs. He struggled, cursing, swinging clumsy fists that I easily avoided. I held him there, watching his face twist from anger to fear as the reality of his situation set in. Enjoy the money while it lasts, I whispered, because I'll make sure it runs out. Every penny you think you've made from this game, every dollar you think you can bleed from someone else, I'll be there, waiting. He laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. You think you're the only one who's been burned? She used me, too. Said she'd leave you. We'd go somewhere together. His voice was slurred, almost pleading. I'm not the only villain here. Maybe, I said, leaning closer, my voice barely more than a whisper. But I'm the one who wins. With that, I let him go, watching as he staggered backward, fear dawning in his eyes. I left him there in that alley, his smug grin shattered, his confidence rattled. And as I walked away, I knew that was the last time I'd ever see him. His world would unravel, just as Janine's had. But this time, I wouldn't even have to lift a finger. Days after the encounter with Adrian, a darker plan began to take shape. A final strike, one that would ensure Janine and Adrian could never rebuild the lives they'd wrecked together. I'd left them stripped, stranded, and floundering. But as the days passed in the quiet of my Greek villa, a sharper need for justice grew within me. They hadn't just betrayed me, they'd torn down everything I'd worked for, devoured everything I'd loved. No amount of distance felt enough. No simple financial ruin seemed quite like enough. If they wanted to play games, I'd raise the stakes. The next day, I made a call to an old friend in the States. Marcus was a man who dealt in information, the kind that was best left off the books. We'd met years back when he was a contractor for some questionable business ventures I'd invested in. Ventures that turned out profitable, when a well-placed nudge sent competitors crumbling. He owed me a favor or two, and I had a feeling he'd enjoy the task I had in mind. Marcus, I said as he picked up, I need you to find every dark corner and buried skeleton in Adrian Hawke's life. Marcus's chuckle rippled over the line. Going nuclear, are we? Consider it an experiment in poetic justice, I replied coldly. Within days, I had a thick file on Adrian's life. Marcus had dug into everything: outstanding debts, unpaid taxes, forged documents, and, most interestingly, ties to an underground circle that dealt in specialty services for high-paying clients. Adrian's thrill-seeking ways weren't just a hobby. He'd turned it into a dark enterprise. And he'd made enough enemies to ensure that, with a single push, the entire rotten structure would come crashing down. Then came Janine. With Marcus's help, I traced her current situation, a spiraling descent into unpaid bills and mounting debt collectors. She'd even sold off her mother's engagement ring to cover rent, yet it was never enough. And I'd made sure of that, ensuring my attorney slowed the divorce proceedings just enough to keep her grasping, desperate. Janine was clinging to her last resources. Her life, once filled with ambition, was now a mess of clawing to survive in the barest of ways. When I found out Adrian was still taking payments from a small network of clientele who preferred secrecy, I saw my opening. He had slipped into a business involving wealthy clients who had more money than scruples, and any hint of scandal could ruin him. I wanted him discredited, exposed, not just to his clients, but to everyone in his network. High-end business people, shadowy contacts, and the kind of men and women who valued loyalty above all. They wouldn't take kindly to his failure to maintain discretion. The final act took shape. I'd use his own network to destroy him. I reached out to Marcus one last time, arranging to leak details of Adrian's dealings to his network through anonymous messages. Claims about unpaid debts, about infidelities with clients' wives, each message more damning than the last, each one designed to sow distrust. With a final message to his clients, I included select images and recordings, proof of his lies, his broken promises, and, in one particularly damning shot, a picture of Janine, her face blurred but unmistakably recognizable to those who knew. The messages suggested he'd been keeping personal records of his encounters to use as leverage. When the first call came in from one of his powerful clients, a man known for his particular ruthlessness, I knew the match had been struck. Within days, Adrian's world imploded. His network, his clients, his finances, all gone. Clients pulled their accounts, vendors canceled their agreements, and whispers spread that he'd crossed a line you didn't cross with men who had both money and a taste for vengeance. The last I heard, he was desperate, a man on the run with nowhere left to turn. But I wasn't done. A month later, I returned to the States for the final part of my plan. I had been keeping tabs on Janine, and I knew exactly where she'd retreated. A tiny, half-furnished apartment on the edge of the city, her last refuge after selling everything else. She had no friends left to help her, and her family had distanced themselves after hearing rumors of her betrayal. She was truly, utterly alone. The day I visited her was overcast, the sky a dull gray that matched the concrete walls of her building. I waited until evening, then knocked on her door, hearing the hesitant shuffling on the other side. The door cracked open, and there she was. Her face, once so meticulously made up, was pale and hollow. She looked at me, her eyes widening in fear and, for a brief second, a flicker of hope. "Michael," she whispered, almost reverent. You came back." "Hello, Janine," I said calmly, stepping inside without waiting for her to invite me. She looked around, as if realizing she had nothing left to hide behind. "I made mistakes, I know that," she started, her voice trembling. "I was lost, Michael. You were reckless, selfish, and dishonest. You ruined everything for the thrill of some nobody," I cut her off, watching as the hope in her eyes faded, replaced by a dawning horror. "You don't understand. I thought maybe we could talk, maybe fix this. I've lost everything." She trailed off, looking at me with pleading eyes. "That was the point," I replied, my voice hard. "Everything you did, Janine? You earned this. Every moment of your ruin, every dollar you lost, it was your own doing." She crumbled, collapsing onto the couch, her hands shaking as she tried to muster some response. But I wasn't interested in her words anymore. I'd come here only to see the outcome, to witness the hollow shell she'd become. "There's nothing left for you, Janine. Nothing to rebuild. Consider this our final goodbye." I turned and left, leaving her there in the silence of her own destruction, a woman who had gambled everything and lost. As I stepped into the cool night air, I felt the weight lift from my chest, a satisfaction deeper than I'd ever imagined. I had walked away from the wreckage she'd created, but she was forever bound to it, a ghost haunting the ruins of a life that once held everything she thought she deserved. After cutting Janine off, I'd expected her family to rally around her, maybe offer some comfort, a shoulder to cry on. But, to my mild surprise, they'd largely abandoned her when her secrets came to light. Her parents were well-off, socially conscious people who hated scandal. They couldn't bear the humiliation Janine had brought on them, and I knew her siblings had all but erased her name from family gatherings. Still, there was more to the story. Janine's family had seen me as a means to elevate their social status, always angling for invitations to my company's events, pushing me to connect them with people in my circle. They'd enjoyed the perks that came with being in my orbit, and had done everything they could to pull strings and call in favors using my name, whether I knew about it or not. It was time they paid for that entitlement, for the way they'd treated me as a tool, an accessory to flaunt. They hadn't stood by Janine because she was a lost cause, but they also hadn't hesitated to milk my name and connections dry when it suited them. If they wanted to keep my resources and influence as their private playground, I'd turn that playground into quicksand. First, I paid a visit to my lawyers. Through them, I accessed every charitable foundation, social committee, and corporate board that Janine's family had weaseled their way into with my name. They'd been leveraging my position, making generous donations to various high society causes on my behalf, or rather, on what they thought would be my dime. Over the next few weeks, I methodically pulled every penny of funding I'd once allocated to those causes. I revoked memberships, withdrew endowments, and sent formal letters to each organization, politely explaining that I no longer wished to sponsor any initiative with ties to Janine's family. I even had my attorney draft personal letters to those groups, explaining why. A concise, factual retelling of Janine's actions, the financial betrayals, and her family's underhanded uses of my name and funds. No details were spared. Within a month, Janine's family name became associated with one of the biggest personal scandals in our social circle. The whispers only growing as more people learned just how far they'd been leeching off of me. Her father, a retired banker, had been using his perceived connection to me to negotiate consulting gigs, always implying I was a silent partner in his projects. I arranged to have my attorney officially clarify to those firms that I had no part in any endeavor associated with him. Several contracts dropped instantly, and by the time the dust settled, he had been blacklisted from half the firms he'd worked with in the last year. Then, there was her mother, an avid socialite, with her own circle of influence. She'd hosted fundraisers in my name, claiming my partnership for her philanthropic image. I saw to it that every high society donor she'd courted through my connections received a careful explanation of her misuse of my name and her lack of authorization. Almost overnight, she was shunned from the social clubs she'd prided herself on. The family name became toxic, a quiet disgrace. But the real satisfaction came with Janine's younger brother, Alec, who had been desperate for a spot at a high-profile firm where I had substantial influence. He'd been sending applications for months, leaning on the family name, expecting that I'd inevitably help him slide into the coveted position. When his application finally came across my desk, I made sure he received a personal response, a polite rejection, detailing that his association with Janine's recent actions made him unsuitable for any position tied to my name. The fallout was immediate. With their reputation in tatters, the family began to fracture. Her father pulled away from his business circles, bitter and ashamed. Her mother retreated into near seclusion, disappearing from her usual social gatherings. Alec's career was derailed before it even began, his name blacklisted in an industry that valued discretion and spotless reputations. They couldn't claw their way back to respectability because every door, every connection, every whispered favor they'd once asked of me was now sealed against them. And in that silence, when they realized the extent of the consequences, when their names faded into whispers, tarnished beyond repair, I felt the dark satisfaction I'd been seeking. I'd left Janine to ruin herself, and her family had been dragged down with her. They'd lost the status, the perks, the carefully polished reputation they valued so dearly. And as I watched from afar, living my life free of them all, I knew I'd given them the very thing they'd never forget. A scandal they could never escape. A brand on their names that would follow them wherever they went. For them, there was no coming back. Months slipped by, each one easier than the last. The memories of Janine and her family's betrayals faded like bruises healing over time, leaving me with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. I rebuilt my life piece by piece, cultivating friendships that were genuine, immersing myself in work, and even finding small joys in things I'd forgotten I enjoyed. The villa in Greece became my sanctuary, a place I returned to often, a quiet world far removed from the chaos I'd left behind. Then, one afternoon, as I watched the sun dip into the ocean, casting amber light across the waves, my phone rang with a call from Marcus. "Got some news you might be interested in," he said, a familiar tone of amusement in his voice. I could almost picture his smirk through the line. "Is it good or bad?" "That depends on your perspective," he chuckled. "Janine, she's back in the States. I don't think she's doing too well." I hadn't thought about her in weeks, not directly. Knowing she'd been left to face the wreckage of her choices was enough. But this caught my attention, a subtle tug in the back of my mind. "What's going on?" I asked, half curious, half resigned. "Rumor has it she's been trying to climb her way back up. She found some low-level job, took on extra work. It's pretty bleak from what I hear. But that's not the interesting part. It seems she's also been asking around about you." "Me?" I said, surprised. "Mm-hmm. She's been telling people she needs to find you, that she wants closure. He practically laughed as he said it, and I couldn't help but smile grimly. Closure. The irony wasn't lost on me. What closure could she expect, now that she was left with nothing but the shattered remnants of her past? She'll never get it, I replied, the words coming easily, and they felt final, like the last nail in a coffin long buried. Let her chase a ghost. But a quiet curiosity lingered, a need to close the book fully, with no lingering questions. A few days later, I asked Marcus to set up a final meeting, someplace public, where I could see her one last time, let her understand the depth of her ruin. He obliged, arranging for her to meet me in a small cafe back in the States, a place no one would think twice about. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting in a corner booth, staring out the window, her face hollow and gaunt, eyes sunken with exhaustion. She didn't see me at first, so I took a moment to take it all in. The woman I'd once loved, now a stranger, her former confidence drained away, leaving nothing but the bare bones of who she really was. Michael. She looked up as I approached, her eyes wide, a fragile, desperate hope flickering in them. She tried to smile, a faint, broken thing that faded as she took in my expression. Janine, I said, sitting across from her, keeping my tone cold, neutral. Why am I here? She faltered, searching for words. I wanted to talk, to explain myself. I let out a breath, feeling a bitter amusement rise within me. Explain herself, as if her actions could be justified. She continued, her voice trembling. I know I hurt you, and I've paid for it, more than you could ever imagine. I thought maybe we could, I don't know, understand each other. Maybe move past it. I studied her, letting her words hang in the air. There was a small part of me that almost pitied her, seeing her laid bare, stripped of everything. But then I remembered the games she'd played, the lies, the betrayal, the way she'd tossed away our life for the thrill of something cheap and meaningless. Move past it, I repeated, voice low. I already have. The hope drained from her face, replaced by something raw, desperate. She reached across the table, as if to take my hand, but I pulled back, watching as her expression twisted. You don't understand, she whispered, her voice thick with tears. I have nothing left. I can't even get a job in this city without people whispering. My family, they won't talk to me. Adrian vanished, took everything he could, left me with nothing. I can't do this alone. You made your choice, Janine, I said, my voice cold, final. You wanted a thrill, a life free of me. Now you have it. She let out a choked sob, the realization sinking in, her face a picture of despair. You're really just going to leave me like this? I stood looking down at her, feeling nothing but a hollow satisfaction. Consider this closure, Janine. You wanted freedom. Now you're free. Without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving her sitting alone, the broken pieces of her life scattered around her like ashes. As I stepped into the cool evening air, I felt a weight lift, a clean final break from the past. I'd closed the book, left the wreckage behind, and as I walked away, I knew with absolute certainty that I'd never look back.